I'm Jake.
I'm Tom.
And we are VIMTV Velocities in Music. Two guys from Iowa with red beards who are very enthused to listen to music, criticize it, and then tell you whether we like it or not. That's what we do. Really, that's what we do.
That's about it, yeah.
That's about all we do. We're going to review a new album from a band called Bleachers. But Bleachers, you may actually have some familiarity, because if you listen to the radio in the last 2 years, you probably heard some songs from Fun's most recent record, which was a blockbuster success, Some Nights.
Yep.
And Bleachers is the project of the lead guitarist from Fun. His name is Jack Antonoff, if I'm pronouncing that right.
That's how I'd pronounce it.
Yeah, and so Bleachers is kind of this side project that he's been working on. Did a little collaboration with a couple other artists. Grimes makes an appearance on this album, as does Yoko Ono.
Yeah, interesting.
Yes, it is interesting, an interesting pool of people that he pulled together to make this. This definitely has an 80s vibe to it. Yeah. You wouldn't think with with Fun's direction that they've coming from the format into Fun, where they did Aim and Ignite, which is a indie, I would call it an indie pop record, but it still had a lot of like rock elements to it. There's a lot of cool guitar work, but
kind of a rock opera.
Yeah, it was almost a rock opera, and then they went off the charts with Some Nights and trying to make everything as absolutely flamboyantly poppy and overproduced as possible. We did not like that album, but there are a lot of people out there that did. But we did comment on the direction and really the initiative that the band took to push their sound into the stratosphere. And while we didn't like it, it still obviously had a huge impact on the pop music scene. Now, so what we're expecting from Bleachers is something, I mean, how do you manage expectations for this album? Maybe you know it's the guitarist, so you figure it's going to be guitar-centric. Not at all!
Nope.
I would say, Tom had helped me describe Strange Desire, but I would say that this is mostly electronic-based with a lot of synthesizers and a lot of 80s production with the occasional guitar melody. But the big thing here is about percussion and creating these just anthemic vocal melodies.
Very much so. And anthemic is a great word for it. And there's not, while there are a lot of artists using this similar sound palette in the pop genre, I don't think anyone's really approaching it quite like Bleachers is. The closest comparison I could make to something I've heard would be like another very anthemic band, Matt and Kim. But they approach it from a completely different standpoint. And something about their sound is very, very bright, it's uplifting. This album, while it's poppy in presentation, when you get down to a lot of these songs, it's actually a lot of heartbreak. It's very melancholy.
Yes.
But I will say it's this very like sappy melancholy that you can't help but identify with. Right. It makes me think like any of these songs could have been in a 1980s John Hughes film.
That's a great point.
Oh crap, I get like Breakfast Club or like 16 Candles, that kind of thing, like young love and heartbreak, and like it just sounds like the soundtrack to something like that. But it's fun to listen to, and I think that element does give it a bit more depth and a bit more personality than what you get out of just kind of generic pop radio, at least for me. And especially considering, I mean, this guy, he's a good songwriter, he just has a knack for melody.
The first 4 tracks on this album, I mean, they just hit you in the face with these pop anthem theme that he's going for here. You got big beats, electronic melodies and stuff like that, but it's all about the vocals. It's all about these choruses. Starting with track 2, Roller Coaster, a mutual track pick of both Tom and I. It just has the verses are very melodic, but then you just hit the chorus and it's so loud, and you have like multiple tracks of vocals in there. And it's just a chorus of just raining down upon you that you can't help but get out of your head. Then Shadow and I Want to Get Better. And I Want to Get Better, I think, I mean, another mutual track pick of ours. That track in particular, I have not been able to get out of my head for the past week. And when an artist is able to do that, they're doing something right. Now, one thing I gotta comment on is the fact that this isn't anything overly progressive or experimental. It's pretty much straightforward pop structure of verse, chorus, with a little bit of variety in there to set up these different parts, but the key thing that they're doing is controlling dynamics. And that's what I think gives this album so much of an allure, some of these tracks so much of an allure, is that they're just really focusing on making the verses melodic and listenable, but then they just smack you in the face with these super loud poppy choruses with great melody.
Yeah, and they do that right from the beginning of the album with the opening track, Wild Heart. perfect example of that, because the song starts and it's fairly quiet, and then when that first just pounding drum comes in, it's so loud. And it's nice to see an artist in this genre not over-compress the crap out of their music so that it kills dynamics, because that's what a lot of people are doing these days. And he allowed room for that to come in and actually have an impact. That shows a lot of tact.
Yeah, actually production is something I want to talk about, because it doesn't really come off as a very overproduced album. It's very underproduced, if anything. And while a lot of the production effects are very 80s tinged, I would say, I wouldn't say that this is at all production is a strength of this record. I mean, things kind of feel rough around the edges. It has almost kind of like a worn hue to it. I don't know how else to describe it. But I think that gives the sound some room to traverse these different dynamic contrasts that the band's playing with. So I think it does pull it off, or helps pull it off, the sound off in the end. Now, where I would criticize this album, Tom, tell me if you agree. I think the back half of this record is not nearly as strong as the front half. Those really, you know, you have after track 6, Reckless Love, which is this acoustic and synth track that really, where I think his vocals start to sound like The National, and just a very moving track, and kind of a heartbreak tone to it, like you were saying. But after that, you have Take Me Away, which featured Grimes, a very dancey song that I just didn't get into. And then later on in the album, the track with Yoko Ono, track 10, I'm Ready to Move On, and then also Wild Heart Reprise. I felt like, especially the I'm Ready to Move On section of that song, just did not sound very good to me, and therefore I felt like those were just weaker tracks.
I appreciated the contrast and the variety that it provided.
It does provide
but still, you know, if the quality of it, if the content itself isn't that good on its own, then the contrast doesn't really mean quite as much.
Another track 9, You're Still a Mystery. I did not feel like that was very strong at all. It's pretty much a 80s synth-pop track that you could take like from several 80s bands and then just plug into this album. I just expected more after hearing the first 6 songs on this record. I expected more out of the back half. Now, one positive note is that they ended the album very strongly. Tom, you really enjoyed the last track, Who I Want You to Love.
Yeah, that song was really cool. It brings it down a bit more. It's more intimate. Now, I noticed that some of the lyrical content and just, you know, kind of the vibe, the chord progressions they're using does make for more intimate listen. But then, of course, then you have the big production coming in and the big beats and synths, and it makes it a little more in your face. I felt like that one stripped it down a little bit more
it totally goes into that whole Beatlesque section where you have just the moving bass and the strings and everything, and just a really cool, different way to end the album, but still sum up kind of everything that you heard, because ending with a Beatlesque sound kind of makes sense, because, I mean, all of this music, while very electronic, it was definitely inspired by the Beatles and these super pop choruses.
Oh, you can definitely tell that. But I totally agree with you. I think that the last half of the album is a bit weaker. I think a lot of the strong tracks are on the front half. And I had an interesting experience with this album, because at first, if you know anything about me, you know I just get turned off by the whole pop presentation. So it takes a few listens for me to really get past that and see what they're doing in the songwriting. And I did, you know, once I got past the production and the presentation, I really did like a lot of what they were doing in the songwriting, especially with the melodies and the chord progressions. But then once I got even further than that into some of the lyrics and the structures, I felt like it got to be a little bit one-dimensional. I can only listen to guys singing about hearts so much before I just think, you know what, find another metaphor, find something to make this a little bit more intriguing with the way that you're approaching romance and relationships. I feel like there's just a lot more you can do with that. Maybe it doesn't make it as accessible to like 15 and 16-year-olds. I'm not a 15 or a 16-year-old, so obviously I'm just listening for something different. And that's fine. It's not right or wrong. It's just about what you're listening for, where you're at in your life, and what you connect with musically. And so this, a little bit missed the mark for me in terms of that connection, especially when you can tell that with a lot of these tracks, they're really going for an emotional appeal. That didn't always get me. What actually got me more were just kind of the more fun, energetic tracks, like I Want to Get Better and Roller Coaster, which Roller Coaster still has kind of an emotional appeal to it.
Certainly.
But then the last track, I thought that they pulled that off much better than all the tracks that came before it that were trying to do that.
So a little hit and miss for you?
Yeah, a little bit hit and miss for
What
me.
would you give this?
I'm going to give this a 73.
Okay. Now, for those who always think that we agree, or think that we always agree, which we've been accused of several times, Tom, let's just face it, this is where we will starkly disagree, because I actually really enjoyed this record.
Cool.
I didn't really, I mean, I think that, you know, and maybe it just shows the, like, the general immaturity that I project, but I feel like that whole 15, 16-year-old, like, romance vibe really made this quite endearing, and I think that the difference is that I felt like it kind of awoke that, like, the inner kid inside of you, like, the pining, like, when you start to grow up, and maybe this is, you know, pretentious of me to even go into, but, like, I'm at the stage, I'm married, I have a kid, I have a job, I work 8 to 5 every day, so, like, my job, or my life is very mundane, and so to have an album that, like, awakes those things in you, it has kind of, like, a unique appeal to it, so I definitely got into that more, again, especially with, like, the bigger production tracks and that huge dynamic contrast. Anytime that an artist can take that pop structure and make me not care about it, they're doing something right in the songwriting, and it excited me. And really, other than those 2 tracks that I mentioned, maybe the 3 tracks that I mentioned that I thought were a little weaker and kind of brought down the back half of the album, I give them credit for ending the album very strongly and making this a relatively fluid listen. So I probably would like this album a lot more if those 3 tracks were, I just think, stronger. I mean, I enjoyed the variety, but I wish they were just a little bit stronger. I'm going to go 82 on this one. So that puts us at, I think, like a 78 overall. So 78 is an album we would recommend to you guys. And not something that we're collectively in love with. Obviously, I like it a little bit more than Tom, but something we would definitely recommend. Now, a lot of you guys requested Bleachers, so do you love this album? If so, why? If you're not liking it, tell us why too, because we'd love to see who you agree with more.
Also, tell us what your strange desire is. Keep it PG-13 though.
No, don't.
Okay. Jake wants to hear what your crazy strange desires are.
Awake the 15 or 16-year-old inside of me.
That is highly disturbing.
It is. Leave us a comment, www.velocitiesandmusic.com or youtube.com/velocitiesandmusic. Now, as always, follow us on Twitter, like us on Facebook, and let Tom or I know if there's any records like Bleachers that you'd like to see us review on this channel. I'm Jake.
I'm Tom.
And we are VIMTV, moving music critique forward.